Recently, I done a video on American presidential rankings based on the Wikipedia article on that. One of my subscribers, I'm sure he won't mind me mentioning him, Toxic Holy Grenade, you cited if such a poll had been done on British prime ministers, and indeed it has. There's been several, not as many as American presidential studies, but there's been a few. So without further ado, I'm going to read out the UK prime minister's article. But before I do this, it's worth noting that within my lifetime, there are certain prime ministers who are era defining. I would say particularly Margaret Thatcher and Tony Blair. Possibly Boris Johnson, if we take him to be the Brexit prime minister, then you'd have to go with that being era defining. Um, but certainly Blair and Thatcher are generational prime ministers in a way that none of the other prime ministers of my lifetime have been. Um, you get prime ministers who are very famous for a particular reason. Churchill for his wartime leadership, um, and then of course the great feud between Gladstone and Disraeli in the 19th century. William Pitt the Younger for his tenure during the Napoleonic Wars, and David Lloyd George for his leadership in the First World War. But anyway, this is the opening paragraphs of the article, academic opinion. So just read this out as an introduction. In December 1999, a BBC Radio 4 poll of 20 prominent historians, politicians and commentators for the Westminster Hour produced the verdict that Churchill was the best British Prime Minister of the 20th century. Incidentally, Churchill was also voted the greatest Briton in the famous 2002 Greatest Britain poll. Lloyd George was second place, Clement Attlee in third place. This was a 1999 study. As Blair was still in office, he was not ranked. The worst Prime Minister in that survey I should say, was judged to be Anthony Eden. Not sure where they ranked Margaret Thatcher. In 2004, the University of Leeds and Ipsos Mori conducted an online survey of 258 academics who specialise in 20th century British history and politics. There were 139 replies to the survey at a return rate of 54%, by far the most extensive survey done so far. The respondents were asked, among other historical questions, to rate all the 20th century prime ministers in terms of their success, and asking them to assess the key characteristics of successful ones. Respondents were asked to indicate a scale of 0 to 10. A lot of this is just the criteria, so I'm going to skip forward and talk a little bit more about the other surveys. In 2006 issue of BBC History, historian Francis Beckett ranked the 20th century prime ministers with points out of 5 based on how well the leaders implemented their policies, not on the policies themselves. That's an interesting criteria. And by this survey, Margaret Thatcher and Clement Attlee shared the highest ranking. In 2010, the University of Leeds and Wood Newton Associates carried out a survey of 106 academics who specialise in British history or politics, and that survey ranked Churchill actually lower than you might expect because it was based on a second term only. This was going on prime ministers 1945 to 2010, so it was only considering Churchill's second term. In October 2016, the University of Leeds conducted a study. This is following the Brexit referendum. Again, Churchill, only his second premiership, his second term was judged. In June 2021, the University of Leeds, they seem to be leaders in this field. Again, with Wood Newton Associate surveys 93 academics specialising in British politics and modern British political history to rank the performance of post-war prime ministers from Churchill to May. And this is some of the results. So this is, if I get this right, the University of Leeds 2021. And this is going by, I think, prime ministers of the last century. It's not going to prime ministers before that. That's why I say these surveys aren't as comprehensive as the American ones, which tend to look at all American presidents. So this is the University of Leeds 2021. They have Clement Attlee in top spot, followed by Margaret Thatcher and Tony Blair. This is the University of Leeds 2021. That is followed by Harold Wilson, Harold Macmillan, Gordon Brown, Winston Churchill. Churchill only makes it to 7th in this study. James Callaghan. I think many people would raise eyebrows at Churchill being tied with Callaghan. John Major, also tied. Edward Heath, David Cameron, Alec Douglas-Home, Anthony Eden, Theresa May, the Marquess of Salisbury, Arthur Balfour. Well, actually, they're not even ranked in that study. So that's only of the last, that's the University of Leeds 2021. Now, the University of Leeds 2016 study, again, has Attlee in the top spot, followed by Margaret Thatcher and Tony Blair. Harold Macmillan in fourth place, and in that study, this is the University of Leeds 2016, they have Douglas-Home in the bottom spot. This is of the Prime Ministers they surveyed. Now the University of Leeds 2010, again this is the institution. Once again, Attlee in top spot, followed by Thatcher and Blair, Macmillan, Wilson, Churchill. So similar results from each survey. In their 2010 survey, they have Eden in the bottom spot. 2006, they have, this is the Beckett study of 2006. Now he places Attlee in the top spot. Attlee varies very well in these studies. It could be a post-war reconstructionist prime minister, I think it's fair to say. Of course, create the modern welfare state. Bottom of the Beckett study was Neville Chamberlain. University of Leeds Ipsos Mori 2004. They have Clement Attlee in top spot. Like I say, Attlee does very well in these studies, followed by Winston Churchill. And then in the bottom spot, they have Anthony Eden. And finally, the BBC Radio 4 1999 study, this is by academics, has Churchill in the top spot, followed by David Lloyd George, Clement Attlee, H.H. Asquith, and then Margaret Thatcher in fifth place. Bear in mind, 1999, it's not that long after Thatcher's premiership. Harold Macmillan in sixth place. And at the bottom of that study was Anthony Eden. So Eden, Chamberlain don't fare very well in those studies, whereas Attlee fares very well. Now, this is rankings of Prime Ministers by Members of Parliament, and this is in 2023. And if I've got this right, I'll just read this out carefully. There were 65 correspondences from sitting MPs. Let's see. Excuse me, I've got that wrong. In 2013, a group of, not 2023, 2013, a group of academic staff and students at Royal Holloway, University of London, conducted a postal survey of British members of Parliament, asking them to evaluate the success of post-war prime ministers. 158 MPs replied to the survey, a response rate of 24%. Remember, there's 650 MPs. The respondents were 69 Conservative, 67 Labour MPs, 14 Liberal Democrats, and 8 MPs from other parties. So it's, cross-party responses. And this is their studies in 2013. This is from MPs. At the very top, they have Margaret Thatcher, followed by Clement Attlee, then Tony Blair, Winston Churchill in fourth spot, according to MPs in 2013. And that's actually factoring in, well, I think that's only looking at his second term. That's important because I think most people would say Churchill's second term was pretty average compared to his famous wartime leadership. The bottom of that study in 2013 was Gordon Brown. Now bear in mind we've had several prime ministers since then. This study was redone again in 2023 with only 65 correspondents, and the results were similar. Again, Thatcher made it to the top spot, followed by Attlee and Blair, and Churchill again in fourth place. But a slight switch around. In the 2023 study, Harold Wilson made it to fifth place, and Harold Macmillan sixth place. In the 2013 study, it was the other way around. I think history's treated Harold Wilson kindly. The bottom of the 2023 study was Liz Truss, no surprise there. Okay, now I'll go just going forward a bit. This is all prime ministers, and this one is the Times and Airedale specifically ranked all or almost all prime ministers, and they've done this in 2010 right up to 2020, and I'm just going to go through some of these quickly to round this off. Now this is looking at all prime ministers. I'll go to the most recent one. This is Airedale 2020, and he ranks see where we are. Winston Churchill's top spot, William Ewart Gladstone second, William Pitt the Younger third, Margaret Thatcher fourth, Clement Attlee fifth, David Lloyd George sixth, Herbert Asquith seventh, Benjamin Disraeli eighth, the Marquess of Salisbury ninth, and Robert Walpole 10th. Not very surprised by those results. Now Dale places at the bottom of his 2020 study. Bear in mind this was before Liz Truss, Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer. He ranks at the very bottom Viscount Godric, not surprising there, George Canning, the Duke of Devonshire, the Earl of Wilmington, Anthony Eden and Theresa May at the very bottom. Now, just looking back to slightly older studies, looking at all the Prime Ministers, the Times 2010 has in the first place Winston Churchill, second place David Lloyd George, third place William Ewart Gladstone, fourth place William Pitt the Younger, fifth place Margaret Thatcher, sixth place Robert Peel, seventh place Clement Attlee, eighth place Earl Grey. There's a big monument in Newcastle to Earl Grey, the Grey Monument. 4 years in office, but his term saw the Great Reform Act and the abolition of the slave trade across the empire. Robert Walpole in 9th place, Benjamin Disraeli in 10th place, Asquith in 11th, jointly with the Marquess of Salisbury, Viscount Palmerston at 13th. The bottom of that 2010 Times study was, drum roll, Lord North, who famously lost to America, although he was in power for 11 years, the Duke of Grafton, who most people won't have heard of. He was famously involved in the, I believe it was the loss of Corsica during the 7 Years' War, if I've got that right. Maybe mixing that up slightly. 48th position, George Grenville. That's Grenville the Elder, not Grenville the Younger. Anthony Eden, the Earl of Bute, who was said to be the last royal favourite. The Earl of Rosebery, the Duke of Devonshire, Baron Grenville, that's Grenville Jr. One good thing his administration done was the abolition of the slave trade. The Earl of Aberdeen, the Duke of Newcastle and the Duke of Portland. And just out of interest, roughly halfway through, we have, Russell at 21st, Campbell Bannerman at 22nd, Heath at 23rd, the Duke of Wellington at 24th, much better general than politician, and Viscount Melbourne at 25th. And just to round this off, I'll do one more study, which is, Sir Peter Riddle. I'll do two more. Sir Peter Riddle 2010, top spots, Winston Churchill, 1. Just getting the right little arrow here. Winston Churchill at 1, sticking. Gladstone at 2, David Lloyd George at 3, Thatcher at 4, Pitt the Younger at 5. And at the very bottom of his study, we have Viscount Godric, the Earl of Wilmington, the Duke of Grafton, the Earl of Bute, George Grenville and Spencer Perceval, who today is mostly famous for being assassinated. And finally, I will do the Matthew Paris survey of 2010. Churchill in the top spot, followed by David Lloyd George, Margaret Thatcher, William Gladstone, Clement Attlee, Robert Peel. Let's see here. Benjamin Disraeli, George Canning. Interestingly enough, Paris places very highly. Be interested to know his reasoning for that. Earl Grey and the Marquess of Salisbury. Just out of interest, I'm seeing where he has Tony Blair here. Tony Blair he puts right down at 34th, which I think is a bit harsh and unwarranted. He has Gordon Brown in bottom spot, followed by George Grenville, the Earl of Wilmington, Lord North, and Ramsay MacDonald. So that gives us an idea. Generally speaking, Churchill, Lloyd George, Gladstone, Attlee, Thatcher tend to be in the top spots, and George Grenville, Lord North, Viscount Godric, George Canning, Ramsay MacDonald, Anthony Eden, Liz Truss tend to make it to the bottom positions. And then usually somewhere around the middle is people like James Callaghan, Ted Heath, the Earl of Wilmington, the Duke of Wellington, Lord Russell, John Major. They tend to be somewhere around the middle. David Cameron tends to be around there as well. So that gives us an idea. Personally speaking, in my lifetime, I would rank Tony Blair as the greatest Prime Minister in my lifetime. I really do think that Iraq was a complete disaster, but he achieved so many other things that shouldn't be overshadowed. That I do place Tony Blair as the greatest Prime Minister of my lifetime. Not without criticism, I'm not blind to Blair's many faults, but I do think he was a transformative Prime Minister who had some very good legislation, along with some bad legislation. So there you have it. I'm going to be doing more of these on other leaders subsequently. So let me know your thoughts. Who do you think is the greatest Prime Minister in your own lifetime and in history? Certainly, it's fair to say some of the earlier ones will be forgotten by now. I mean, who really remembers Henry Pelham or Lord North or the Duke of Newcastle?